Thunder Rolling in the Mountains by Scott Odell and Elizabeth Hall. Read to you by Mrs. Shoemaker. Chapter 19. Our warriors fought the rest of the day and the next. They fought with new anger. Chief Joseph had not been treated as an honored prisoner. The bluecoats tied his hands behind him, then tied his hands and feet. They rolled him in a blanket like a papoose. He could not stand, he could not walk, he could not use his arms. The white soldiers slept in a tent, but my father lay all night beside the mules, without food or water. He was not untied until the paper that speaks came from the soldier Jerome. 2 sons came and went. We had lost no people since the first day of battle, but food was short. Soon even the children would have to go hungry. We were cold and wet with snow. The cruel wind cut to our very bones. The children cried. The women and old men said nothing, but there was pain in their eyes. The 3rd son was a sad time for us. The sadness began in the morning when it grew light and we saw that a party of white soldiers had arrived during the darkness. The one-armed general had joined Colonel Miles. An army of bluecoats would soon spread across the land. When the shooting began that morning, the first shells fell among us. During the night, the white soldiers had dug a trench for their cannon, and the shells no longer struck the bluffs beyond the rifle pits. Another act of shame. The soldier Jerome knew that no warriors were in the shelter pits. Again they warred on the helpless. Shells fell among the women and the children and the old men and the wounded warriors. One shell burst in the shelter pit, covering 6 of our people with earth. We dug fast, scooping away the choking dirt with pots and hats in our hands. I pulled a small boy from the pit. His ears, his eyes, and mouth were full of earth, and he gasped for air, but he was safe. Others dragged 3 women to safety, but we could not reach an old woman and her granddaughter. There was too much dirt, and without air, they died. My father said that we were beaten. The time had come to surrender. Not everyone agreed. Some of the warriors wanted to charge the bluecoats. They said the bluecoats were bad fighters. We might whip them and be free to join Sitting Bull. They would be glad to die for the people. My father said no. We could not fight the cannon, and there were too many soldiers. All our warriors would die, and the women and children and old men would be at the mercy of the bluecoats. My father reminded them of what happened to the women and children at Big Hole. It was better to return to Lapwai and live on the reservation. Looking Glass said he would never surrender. He looked at my father. "I am older than you," he said. "I know the white generals are men with 2 faces and 2 tongues. If you surrender, you'll be sorry. It is better to be dead." Whitebird held up his hand. "Looking Glass speaks the truth," he said. "Surrender if you wish. We will not stop you. We will take those who would rather die and strike out for the old lady's country." The council broke up. The sadness was not yet over. A rider on horseback appeared in the distance. Looking Glass believed it was a Sioux scout, part of the band from Sitting Bull. He stepped out of his rifle pit for a closer look, and a bullet struck him in the head, and he fell sprawled and silent on the ground. We had lost another chief. Now only my father and Whitebird were left to lead us. My father was not a war chief, and Whitebird was old. Under a white flag, my father crossed the plain to the camp of the Bluecoats. The day was gray, and he was wrapped in a gray blanket. His head was down. His rifle lay across the saddle. Wearily he climbed from his horse and walked up to Colonel Miles. "Let us stop fighting," said Colonel Miles. "No more battles. No more blood." The one-armed general stood beside him. Ice crystals clung to his beard. "The war's over," he said. "I've lost brothers. Many of you've lost brothers. Do not worry more. It is time for us to rest." Even with his head bowed, my father towered over General Howard. He drew his blanket closer about him and nodded, but did not speak. Colonel Miles said that he had plenty of food and warm blankets for us. He promised that he would take our people to a nearby camp for the winter, and then we could all go back to our homes. The one-armed general watched Chief Joseph and Colonel Miles shake hands. Then my father walked back to his pony and picked up his rifle. General Howard reached for it. Chief Joseph pulled back the hand holding the gun. He stood very tall. He looked down at the one-armed general. "I am not surrendering to you," he said. He pointed to Colonel Miles. "This is the man that ran me down." My father turned to Colonel Miles. He handed him his gun butt first, and then he stepped back. "I am tired of fighting," he said. "Our chiefs are killed. Looking Glass is dead. The old men are all killed. He who led the young men is dead. It is cold, and we have no blankets. The little children are freezing to death. My people, some of them, have run away to the hills and have no blankets, no food. No one knows where they are, perhaps freezing to death. I want time to look for my children and see how many of them I can find. Maybe I shall find them among the dead." He raised his arm. His blanket flapped in the raw wind. "Hear me, my chiefs," he called. "I am tired. My heart is sick and sad. From where the sun now stands, I will fight no more forever." In sorrow he drew his blanket over his head. One by one our warriors stepped from the rifle pits and filed across the plain. They laid their rifles on the ground in front of the generals. From the shelter pits came the women and children, followed by the old. Wounded warriors crawled from the pits. Some of them leaned on the women and old men. Some of them crawled on their hands and knees. Slowly the long lines of people moved across the ground and up the hill. My heart was filled with sadness. I could not join them. Even when I saw Dear Woman trudge slowly up the hill bearing Bending Willow on her back, I could not join them.